When you sit back and think about it, weight cutting is a bit silly. The point of weight classes is to eliminate the factor of size, but the practice of cutting weight undermines the very spirit of that idea by effectively making it possible for bigger guys to fight smaller guys so long as they have masochistic tendencies. Anthony Pettis, former UFC lightweight and featherweight, currently fights at 170 pounds. In a different timeline, he could have fought against Anthony Rumble Johnson. We live in a world where that was possible. But that's not really what I mean when I say weight cutting is dumb. And I'm not talking about the inherent health risks either. Rather, I'm questioning the very notion that extreme weight cutting is a competitive advantage at all. Wrestling is the most ancient sport in the world. It's also the most universal, as seemingly every culture has its own style of wrestling. But aside from that, wrestling is, objectively speaking, a masochistic endeavor in the purest sense.
In my first days of wrestling class, I remember thinking, what the f***? You guys work this hard? We have to go upstairs? We have to carry someone on our back and climb up stadium stairs?
Mm-hmm.
What the f*** are you talking about?
Yeah.
Firemen carrying each other back and forth across the f***ing gym and racing each other.
Mm-hmm.
And I would leave there. I could barely walk. I was so tired.
Even Forrest Griffin, a professional fighter who is accustomed to the rigorous training and brutal reality of prize fighting, said he wants no part of an amateur wrestler's training regimen. Part of that is due to the physically demanding nature of the sport itself, but it goes further than that. The sheer volume of tournaments and matches means the athletes are never at 100% health. Compounding all of this is the art of cutting weight. What I'm about to say is somewhat speculative, but I will confidently declare it anyway. Extreme weight cutting in MMA had to have come from wrestling. There's a surplus of former wrestlers in MMA, and they have brought with them their weight cutting habits, causing a ripple effect whereby everybody else feels the need to follow along. You just don't see the same disparity between official and unofficial weights in the other major combat sports. In wrestling, the extreme weight cut sort of makes sense. The advantage one gains in size and strength by cutting a lot of weight probably outweighs the potential advantage in conditioning and quickness one could gain from cutting less weight. But there is a problem when importing this tradition into MMA. Yoel Romero has fought 16 professional MMA bouts, winning 13 of them. 11 of these wins were by knockout, because Yoel is a terrifying man. Yoel is perhaps the most athletic, the most explosive, and the most intimidating knockout artist in today's MMA landscape. Even surviving 15 minutes in the cage with him is an achievement that few could accomplish. That Rafael Feijão sure is special. But one man spent a cumulative 50 minutes fighting this genetic anomaly. One man was trapped in a cage with a 40-year-old, 200-plus pound mass of fast twitch muscles, who was bestowed the divine favor of unhuman athleticism. A monster whose trapezius muscles have their own trapezius muscles. One guy spent 50 minutes fighting this irresistible force and actually came out on top. Robert Whittaker started his MMA career at 170 pounds, and he was doing pretty well for himself. But after 5 fights in the UFC, he found himself with a record of 3-2, which included a first-round TKO loss to Stephen Thompson. So Whittaker decided to move up in weight. He's 8-0 since that move, meaning by not doing the thing that is presumed to give him a competitive advantage, Whittaker's career truly began to flourish. When it comes to weight cuts, what differentiates MMA from wrestling is twofold: the duration of the contest and the introduction of striking. It's one thing to trade strength for conditioning when you're planning on wrestling for 6 minutes, but it's another thing entirely to do so when you're planning on fighting 5 rounds of 5 minutes each, all while getting punched and kicked and everything else. And of course, the weight cut has an undeniably adverse effect on a fighter's chin, a factor which is mostly absent from the concerns of a participant in a wrestling tournament. There are other recent examples of fighters going up in weight and having success, like Georges St. Pierre, who won the middleweight title in his middleweight debut by beating Michael Bisping, and Anthony Pettis, who won his welterweight debut against Stephen Thompson, who again had beaten the current middleweight champ Bobby Knuckles. And then there's the example of TJ Dillashaw between the two. Dillashaw's chin was not able to withstand the months earlier. Months after beating Dillashaw, Cejudo won the vacant bantamweight title against Marlon Moraes. I mean, these recent examples may just be pure coincidence. I may be talking from a perspective of recency bias. It would be appropriate to look over a wider data set across multiple promotions and eras and to reach a conclusion based on that. But that's way too hard and I don't feel like it. And unfortunately in MMA we don't have a reference website as robust and as comprehensive as BoxRec is for boxing. So instead, let's just look at more cherry-picked anecdotal evidence. Fedor Emelianenko is probably the greatest heavyweight of all time. He fought at heavyweight for the entirety of his career despite being not all that big. He could have cut weight and fought guys his size, but he chose not to, and we can't really argue with the results. Daniel Cormier's only career loss came at light heavyweight, while at heavyweight he has had a spotless resume. Lyoto Machida went down in weight and lost a bunch of fights. We presumed age was the culprit, but now he's back up at light heavyweight and is making a run at Bellator Gold. Justin Gaethje is smaller than most of his peers, but he overwhelms them with superior volume, conditioning, and bad intentions. Among gatekeepers, Michael Johnson has one of the most interesting resumes in the sport. He's defeated a lot of notable fighters, including Tony Ferguson, Gleison Tibau, and Dustin Poirier. A lot of this was due to his hand speed, which was unmatched in the UFC lightweight ranks. But then he moved down to featherweight with underwhelming results. His hand speed simply doesn't translate to the lower weight class, eliminating possibly his most effective tool. Cutting weight has some serious advantages, but it also has some equally obvious disadvantages. Overall, fighters are at their best when they're fighting at their natural weight class.